Hello, Jesse. Colin Young there in the town of Aiken. Or should I say town or the city of Aiken in South Carolina? What should I say there, Jesse?
It's a town, really.
What's the population?
I don't know, maybe 30,000. We live downtown, and the downtown feels like 5,000. That suits me. I like little towns.
Just to go back, now, I believe that you were born in Queens in New York?
Yes, I was, and I went to school with Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel. We were all in the same grade school. Artie and I were friends. He was a beautiful singer, even back then. I remember him singing a Nat Cole song. The one time I walked over to his house after school, I think Nat Cole was having a big hit when They Try to Tell Us We're Too Young. And we're just walking along the street, and Artie's singing away, and I thought, wow, what a beautiful voice.
Anyway, look, let's get on to your music. Your mother was a violinist.
Yes, but mostly a singer. My voice comes from my mother. Beautiful singer, not professional, but my dad played piano, and we spent a lot of time around the piano singing. And my mother had a beautiful kind of lower soprano, like a mezzo-soprano voice. I think she had perfect pitch. As my father would play along all these songs, she would always tell him when he had flatted or sharped a note wrongly.
What sort of stuff did you sing?
All kinds of, I don't know, what they called camp songs. And camp in those days meant the place you go in the summer when your parents want to get rid of you, for 4 weeks or something, and learn to canoe, and especially for kids from the city. And my dad taught me my dad went to Harvard, so he taught me all of his Harvard fight songs about beating the pants off of Yale, all these football songs. That was unusual. My dad played classical music. When he was an accountant, and when he came home from work, he would most days unwind at the piano, just playing classical pieces. He loved that. But there were no professional musicians in the family. I think we had one piano player who was a third cousin. I don't think it was considered a good profession.
Speaking of Harvard, you won a scholarship to a very prestigious school called Andover University. So was that a musical scholarship?
No, that was a scholarship for my high math and science scores. I think my dad was out of a job when we applied there. So he was in between jobs, and because of his unemployment and my high scores, they gave me a scholarship. And I was there about a year and 2/3. I learned to play the guitar there. I went in, this is 11th grade. I went in, and they offered classical guitar as an elective. So I took it, learned to play, and my roommate was taking it, and instead of playing classical pieces, we started playing Everly Brothers and Ritchie Valens and doo-wop music and harmonizing. That's how I got started with the guitar at Andover. It also got me kicked out. My scholarship meant that I had to serve in the Commons. So I had to get in there early and help with the serving of the meals in the dining room where everybody ate. It was probably 6:30 in the morning. I had to be there, or 6:20. Yeah, and you had to punch your clock in. So I was a couple minutes late 3 or 4 times, and they put me on probation. And I guess that was 20 weeks, so I made it without a demerit. It was hard to be on time at 6:20 in the morning, especially when you love the guitar and like to stay up late playing. So my housemaster came up to congratulate me on completing my probation. I had a concert the next day with a band that I had just formed, and I was practicing. And practicing wasn't allowed during study hours, so they kicked me out. I did a lot of other crazy things. But by the time I was, 35 or so, and had this long-established career through the Youngbloods and then into my solo career, he congratulated me one day and said, "Son, I never would have had the guts to just go out into life without a degree in something or other, meaning a college degree, and just make it happen and be a success like you've been, and I admire you, and I'm proud of you." That kind of talk from your dad is a great gift.
Now, you mentioned, Jesse, that you had a band there at school, so was there a little thing in the back of your mind thinking maybe I can do this as a profession?
Well, it was drawing me already. Once I started playing the guitar, it became my main focus, and I started writing Andover. Probably wrote my first song when I was 15. It was a love song to my girlfriend who was at home. Prep school in those days was all boys, and it's very monastic. That tends to produce a lot of pressure. You're producing a lot of testosterone in those days, in those years. So I needed some kind of release, and music became that, and then writing music. So I went on from Andover back to public high school to finish up. I had a band there, So this was the beginning of having bands. And then I went to Ohio State and had a band in Ohio State called The Plague. When I was at Ohio State, I lived behind a record store, and I had a tape recorder. I was a student, so that the guy who owned the store took a shine to me, and this was pre-shrink wrap. He would let me take records home and tape them and then bring them back, and he'd sell them. So I was exposed to Ray Charles, T-Bone Walker, Muddy Waters, and I began to understand some of the blues roots behind rock and roll. And then also I got exposed on the AM radio to country music. But this was the days when Hank Williams Sr., Flat and Scruggs, and all this kind of music, growing up in New York, I had never heard bluegrass or country. Ohio State, I wasn't very enamored of the university, but my focus was playing music, taping music. I mostly learned to play from listening and then imitating, whether it was T-Bone or Chuck Berry or Muddy. It took me a while to get to slide guitar, but I got there.
You headed off to Greenwich Village in New York?
Yes, actually, I got my father to transfer me to NYU, which is right on Washington Square. I spent a year there, mostly playing the guitar, trying to read books in French and write French book reports. And after that year at NYU, I just gave up.
How were you supporting yourself?
I got a job at the Rockefeller Foundation. I was a purchasing agent for Latin American universities' medical equipment. And when I got this job, I knew nothing about any of it. So I did that for about a year. And during that first year, through my family, I met Bobby Scott. And Bobby Scott, an amazing jazz pianist and composer, also wrote songs like Taste of Honey and He Ain't Heavy, He's My Brother. He was working for Bobby Darin's music company at the time. I played my solo stuff for him. By then, my music was kind of a mixture of blues and country. And he took me into the studio one night, and we made my first solo album called The Soul of a City Boy. We sell it on our website, JesseColinYoung.com. When I met who was once Jim McGuinn in the Village, he was doing Beatles impressions. And we had all fallen in love with the Beatles. All these pokies who were sitting around saying, maybe we should start a band because pop music doesn't have to be crappy anymore. It can be meaningful. Let's start bands. And you had bands like, I think McGuinn took off for the West Coast and formed the Byrds with Crosby. And we formed the Youngbloods in New York, and the Buffalo Springfield sprang up in L.A. I don't think those guys were West Coast guys. Taj Mahal and John Sebastian, he was another folkie. He played on my second folk album called Youngblood. And he played with a lot of people, with Fred Neil, and he did a lot of session work and formed the Love and Spoonful right down the street from where the Youngbloods were playing at the Cafe at Go-Go.
So now tell me, when you met Jerry Corbett, that he only died a few months ago.
Yes, he died this winter. He was a lifetime cigarette smoker and lost the battle with lung cancer back in February. We had two Southerners in the band. Jerry was from Georgia. Drummer Joe was from Memphis. And then Banana and I were both born in New York. So Jerry wanted to be buried next to his parents. I knew his parents well. They were our biggest fans. I mean, if the Youngbloods played anywhere within 10 hours of where they were, they would come. My mom came to see me once at Carnegie Hall. But Jerry's parents couldn't get enough of him and the band. They became like parents to me. So they're both buried down in a little town near Tifton, Georgia, and Jerry wanted to be buried next to them. So he died in Texas, and they brought him home to Georgia, and we buried him next to his parents. It was a pleasure for me to be here in the South and be able. A couple of his friends from all over the country flew in, and of course his daughter is best friends with my daughter. And actually, Jerry had a daughter when I met him, and his relationship with her, with Jessica, kind of got me thinking about having a daughter myself. So Julie, my daughter, Julie was born, maybe 4 years, but they became very best friends, and to this day, they are still in Marin County, California, where the Youngbloods landed when we moved from New York in 1967. And I'm looking at a picture of Corbett right now. I got a picture of him with his horse over my desk. I got a picture of Pete Seeger, one of my other heroes, Mississippi John Hurt, and Lightnin' Hopkins, who I'm proud to say was a friend of mine and taught me blues, myself and John Sebastian.
We had John on the show. I think Lightning Hopkins lived with him for a while or something like that.
Yes, it may have been. I remember going to someone's apartment, and John was there, and that's where I first met him. I had this holster that went all the way around him, and 26 pockets or whatever for every harmonica you could imagine. I thought that was pretty amazing. I'd never seen anything like that. So, and my gold record to get together is there, and then a signed autographed picture from Yo-Yo Ma, who was another one of my heroes. And it says, "With admiration and thanks for all you do for music, warmest regards, Yo-Yo." That's my wall of fame in my little office studio here in Aiken. And then the Youngbloods gold record, which is getting very dingy. You know, we were on RCA, and we said, this is not the right length to be get together. They probably just use an old Elvis record, and I have never taken my gold record apart and tried to play it. So right now, I'm working on an album. I wouldn't call it a jazz album. It's a mixture of, I guess, 4 or 5 new songs that I've written and 3 or 4 jazz standards, and then some of my early compositions, which fit very well into this quiet 4-piece piano quartet. 3 or 4 years ago, we were hosting a Juilliard jazz quartet and putting them up at our house. They were playing here in Aiken. Right down the street, the 2 Pulitzer Prize-winning authors have donated their 40-room mansion to Juilliard. So we have this satellite of Juilliard, like about 100 yards up the street. So I met a piano player named Donald Vega, who was in their master's program, and I fell in love with his playing. So we have been recording on and off. He travels a lot with Ron Carter all over the world, playing jazz. We've been recording here at my place on and off, and now I'm in the process of the last week or so of putting my son, Tristan Young, who is going into his senior year at Berklee College of Music up in Boston, and he's a 6-string bass player. He did resist, he said, becoming a musician as long as he could stand it, because everyone thought that he should.
And the bass guitar, did you thrust a bass at him?
No, but I started playing with this fellow here in Aiken who is from New York and who is a genius 6-string player. I'd never really played with a 6-string bass player, and of course I played bass in the Youngbloods, but I was only a de facto bass player. We couldn't find a bass player, so we had 3 guitar players, and I became the bass player. But this fellow, Mike Frost, who studied with Jaco Pastorius when he was a teenager in New York, and he is the most like Jaco of anyone I've ever heard, and here he is in Aiken teaching bass. So yeah, I suggested to my son, you should study with this guy. He's a genius. Forget the guitar. He went for 1 lesson, and they locked into each other. And 5 years later, finishing his junior year at Berklee College of Music, which is a great world-renowned music school, someplace that I could never get into.
Oh, well, I think you did all right anyway, though, didn't you?
Yes, I just went my own way. I was completely, I had piano lessons when I was a kid, but all the music that I learned and played I did it all by ear. I was an ear musician, and that's what folk music was about, and that's how I started, hearing and imitating and then writing my own music and soaking up blues and soaking up all this incredible. During the Depression here in the 30s, they paid people to go out and record music. One of these fellows was named Alan Lomax, and a young man named Pete Seeger to help him. All these recordings that ended up in the Library of Congress started surfacing in the early 60s on Folkways Records. So we got to hear all this roots music, and that's what spawned a whole generation of folk rockers. I quit the road about 2 years ago, and then I started getting a little itchy for performing, so I started to make little simple videos here at home in my music room. So there are several of them on my Facebook page, the links to them. Also, in my website, we don't only sell my albums, but that's the only place that you can get Arcona coffee. We grow organic, a very small crop, small farm. Jesse Colin Young's Morning Sun Coffee.
That's jessecolinyoung.com.
The links to those videos are on my Facebook page. Of course, they're up on YouTube, but the links are on my Facebook page.
Now, let's get back to the Youngbloods. Now, I recently saw a film called The King of Hollywood, and I don't know if you know the title.
No.
It's basically the story of David Geffen. And in this it's a documentary, actually, and it's all about his career and his personal life. He said that his first band that he managed was the Youngbloods.
He was our agent. He was at William Morris. And actually, when my daughter Julie was born, David Geffen sent her a little pink sootie And yes, we were on RCA. That was our first year on RCA, and so we had a record label, and we signed with William Morris. David was our agent. He was a brilliant, energetic young man. I remember when I made Song for Julie, my first album, kind of breaking away from the Youngbloods, leaning a little more toward jazz. I had met a wonderful woodwind player through my brother-in-law, Scott Lawrence. Song for Julie, there's a lot of flute and saxophone and stuff, which had never been in my music before. I was shopping the record, and I was hoping David would take it. But he said to me, what did he say? He said, you know, Jess, there's no hits on here, and you use cheap echo. And I said, yeah, that's the only echo I could afford. I had a spring reverb. I mean, here I was learning to record by myself in the country. I built a studio, and there was nobody around to teach me, so I would just buy different kinds of equipment and use it. This was a very early effort. But Song for Julie did well. It came out at a time when you could have the song Ridgetop was a really strong, got a lot of play on FM radio. And we probably sold 500,000 records off of just that. But there was no pop hit. David was right.
The strange thing is, actually, your solo albums charted a lot higher than basically all the Youngblood albums.
Right. That was partially due to Warner Brothers, I think. They were an amazing label. I'm glad I ended up there. They were a great label and very generous. I ended up, after 5 years, owning all my masters from Warner Brothers, which I don't own anything from the Youngbloods. We signed in the days when no artist owned any of his catalog. They paid for it, they owned it till death and beyond. The Youngbloods records were, I think the first one may have been 4-track. And by the time we got to Elephant Mountain, it was 8-track. You know that Charlie Daniels produced Elephant Mountain?
Yeah, I just read that.
Yes, and Corbett. You brought up Jerry Corbett, my best friend and my buddy in the Youngbloods. He left the Youngbloods during Elephant Mountain, and he went off to form the Corbett Daniels Band with Charlie Daniels.
Who assigned Charlie? Was it RCA, or did you ask for him?
We asked for Bob Johnston. We wanted Bob Johnston. We thought he was doing such a great job with Simon and Garfunkel and Dylan, and I don't know whether he did Dylan, I can't remember, but he was a production assistant with Bob Johnston, and Bob Johnston was not interested enough or didn't have time to do the Youngbloods, so he sent us Charlie, and what a blessing that was.
Well, that's generally regarded. It's my favourite Youngbloods album. And
absolutely. That's the best we ever did.
I started listening to this radio station about just over 20 years ago, Jesse. I'll tell you this little story. And there was an old-time DJ here. His name was Ted Keeley, and he was amazing because this is when the place had turntables, record turntables. And his show, his 2-hour show, would be just all 45s. He played 60s and 70s records, and generally they were like 2 minutes. So he had only 2 minutes to queue up and make sure that the next record was exactly perfect. And he'd either play the A or the B side, it didn't matter. And I remember hearing this fantastic instrumental, and it was Trillium.
Was it?
Yep, and I got such a shock that it was the Youngbloods because I expected to hear your voice. RCA or you deemed it worthy enough to stick it on a single.
It was a B-side of a single. It was on Elephant Mountain. When Corbett left, we had to meet in the middle. So the three of us, and become a trio as opposed to a quartet. So we started jamming in between. When we'd get bored recording, we were working on Elephant Mountain. We started jamming just to learn how to be a trio without Corbett. And those songs, Trillium, there are 2 or 3 of them, on Sir Francis Drake, came about during the breaks in recording. And of course, Charlie was there to put the tape machine on. This sounds good. And so they were, I can't even remember. It's been so long since I've had Elephant Mountain as a separate entity. Are there not 3 or 4 of them on there?
Yeah, there's 4 of them, I think.
Yeah.
And don't forget, it's in the 1001 albums you should listen to before you die. So my suggestion is to follow the book Elephant Mountain. It's on RCA Records there, Jesse.
Yes, I know, and I don't know whether anybody, over the years, there's occasionally a label will release, instead of just a best of or the essential Youngbloods or whatever, they will re-release Elephant Mountain as a solo album. And I have to say, I don't have one in my possession, so maybe someday. And RCA has never re-released it they've only released, and for a long time they didn't release any of the Youngbloods music. Not the greatest label in the world. Warner Brothers was a real artist label. But they got us started, and there was one man there Augie Bloom. He was the head of promotion. Get Together came out as a single in 1967. It was a hit in San Francisco and maybe Seattle, and that's it. But it's what took us. Because it was a hit, we arrived in the late spring of 67 in San Francisco to play for the first time. We had no idea. I threw my bags down in this cheap motel, turned on this little radio, and there was Get Together on the radio. And we went to the Avalon Ballroom to play that night, and there were 800 or 1,000 people. I mean, we were playing to very small audiences in New York in these crappy little discotheques, and Youngbloods were never considered dance music, but the hippies in San Francisco could dance to anything, and certainly to the Youngbloods. And Get Together became the theme song of that summer of love. And of course, we fell in love with San Francisco, went home, finished the album Earth Music with Felix Pappalardi, packed our stuff. We were in New York still and moved by September. We were in Marin County, living in the country outside of San Francisco, playing the Avalon and feeling like we had died and gone to heaven.
How did you choose the song, Jesse? How did you come across it?
We played at the Cafe Go-Go for about a year, and this was while we were courting record companies and looking for a record deal, so this must have been 65. And we would get paid $20 a night, and we opened for all kinds of people. We opened for Muddy Waters, we opened for Ian and Sylvia, we opened for Bo Diddley, anyone that Howard Solomon said, you guys are opening. And he gave us a place to rehearse on a stage in the afternoons, obviously, with a PA, so we could learn to be a band, because we were a bunch of folkies. I mean, Joe was a jazz drummer. We had to reinvent. The last time any of us had been in bands, we were in high school. So here we were in our mid-20s, coming out of folk music, and me having become a bass player overnight. So we did a lot of rehearsing at the Go-Go, and that was why we were there. Obviously, it wasn't the money. I mean, $20 a night didn't go very far. So I went down on a Sunday afternoon. I was wandering through the village, and I went into the Go-Go to see if it was empty so that I could call up the guys and we could rehearse. And there was an open mic going on. And on stage was a fellow named Buzz Lindhart, and he had this little trio called the Seven Sons. I had seen him playing vibes with Tim Hardin in the village, but I had never heard him sing. And there he was, singing Get Together. I think I had total recall in those days, like a photographic memory. And I ran backstage and I said, hi, I'm Jesse, I'm in the Youngbloods, and you got to write me out the lyrics to that song, because I love it. I must have memorized the melody, and I was able to figure out the chords, which are not terribly complicated, even though Buzz was, I think, playing backwards or upside down. I think it was a lefty. Anyway, he wrote the lyrics out for me backstage, and I took it into rehearsal with the Youngbloods the next day. If I hadn't been wandering through the village, wanting to rehearse my band, and wandered in, I never would have heard it. Dino Valenti wrote that song, and he had already left the village. He was a kind of a cult hero in the village, folk singer. He'd already left for San Francisco and joined Quicksilver Messenger Service. So he left that song there in the village, and I found it. It was released in 67, was a hit in San Francisco. Augie Bloom at RCA, the only man that I could possibly applaud. In 1969, he realized the country having turned against the Vietnam War, and he said this record should be out again now. And he went to his boss at RCA, who said, we don't re-release records. You know, it had its chance, didn't make it. He said, you release this record or I quit. And he was national head of promotion. So they re-released it, and that was when it was a big hit. That was Augie Bloom's work. Without him, never would have happened. So, Augie, if you're on the planet, I think he has passed on. But God bless you. You saved our butts.
Yeah, well, it's one of the defining songs of the era, and there's only a few songs that can be called that encapsulated everything, and yet it was written in the early 60s. Anyway, I want to thank you very much for taking time to talk with us.
All right, mate. Thank you.